Mark was always the guy with the easy smile and quick jokes. At 28, he had everything going for him: good looks, charm, and a steady job at a marketing firm. For 3 years, he'd been dating Emily, a kind-hearted woman who worked as a nurse at the local hospital. They seemed perfect together. Their friends thought they'd be the next to get married. But Mark carried a weight few people knew about. When he was just 7, his dad walked out on him and his mom. One day there, the next gone. That hole never really filled, and it left Mark scared of turning into his father. So when Emily started talking about their future together, about settling down and maybe starting a family someday, something inside Mark broke. Fear took over. All he could think was, what if I fail them? What if I leave like my dad did? On a rainy Tuesday night, after Emily mentioned looking at bigger apartments, Mark panicked. He picked a fight over something small. She'd forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning and turned it into something huge. Maybe we want different things, he told her, watching her face fall. I'm not sure I'm cut out for the white picket fence life. Emily was shocked. Where is this coming from? I thought we were on the same page. But Mark had already made up his mind. Fear was driving him now. The next morning, he called his boss and asked about positions in other branches. By lucky chance, or bad luck, depending on how you look at it, there was an opening in their office 3 states away. I can be there by next week, Mark said, without thinking twice. He packed up his apartment while Emily was at work, taking only what would fit in his car. He left a short note. I'm sorry. I need space to figure things out. You deserve better. What Mark didn't know was that Emily had been trying to tell him something important for days. She'd called him twice that very evening after he left, but he ignored the calls, thinking she wanted to change his mind. Her voicemail said, Mark, we really need to talk. It's important. Please call me back. But he never did. He deleted the voicemails without listening to the end. He changed his number within a week. He told himself a clean break was kinder. No messy goodbyes, no crying, no promises he might break. As Mark drove across state lines, watching the sunset in his rearview mirror, he felt a mix of relief and shame. Relief that he'd escaped before he could mess up someone's life like his dad had messed up his. Shame because deep down, he knew running away wasn't brave. He told himself Emily would find someone better, someone who wasn't broken inside. Someone who could give her everything she wanted without the fear holding them back. She'll be better off, he whispered to himself as the miles stretched between them. She'll forget me soon enough. But life has a way of bringing our biggest mistakes back to us. And Mark had no idea that in 5 years' time he'd be standing face to face with the truth he ran from. A truth that came in a package of 4 small faces that looked remarkably like his own. As he crossed into the next state, Mark pushed thoughts of Emily from his mind. He turned up the radio and focused on the road ahead, unaware that the life he was running from was already taking shape without him. 5 years passed like a dream for Mark. He threw himself into work, climbing the ladder at his new office. His apartment filled with fancy things he didn't really care about. He dated, but never let anyone get close. The moment a woman started talking about the future, he'd find a reason to end things. I'm just focused on my career right now, became his go-to excuse. His coworkers thought he had it all figured out. Single, successful, no responsibilities. But at night, in the quiet of his apartment, Mark sometimes caught himself wondering about Emily. Had she found someone else? Was she happy? He never looked her up online, though. Some doors were better left closed. Then came the day his boss called him into the office with great news. The Henderson project is huge, Mark. It could put us on the map, his boss said, beaming. And we want you to lead it. Mark felt a surge of pride until he heard the location. You'll need to move back to Greenwood for at least a year to oversee everything, his boss continued. It's where you're from, right? Should be easy for you to settle back in. Mark's mouth went dry. Greenwood. The town he'd run from, where Emily still lived as far as he knew. Is there anyone else who could take this? He asked weakly. His boss frowned. This is a promotion, Mark. Most people would be thanking me. So a month later, Mark found himself driving back into Greenwood, his stomach in knots. The town hadn't changed much. The same coffee shop on the corner. The same park where he and Emily used to have picnics. He'd rented an apartment on the other side of town from where they'd lived, hoping to avoid running into her. But Greenwood wasn't big enough for complete avoidance. His third day back, he bumped into Tom, an old friend who'd been in their social circle. Mark smiled, expecting the usual friendly catch-up. "Well, look who finally showed his face," Tom said, his voice cold. "Good to see you too," Mark replied, confused by the reception. "How've you been?" "Better than you deserve," Tom said. "You've got some nerve coming back here." Mark's smile faded. "Look, I know I left suddenly." "Suddenly?" Tom laughed without humor. "You disappeared without a word when Emily needed you most. But you know what? She managed just fine without you. Better, actually." Before Mark could ask what he meant, Tom walked away, leaving him standing there with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. For the next few days, Mark stuck to work and his apartment. But the project required him to scout locations, including the community park for a proposed playground donation. It was a sunny Saturday when he visited the park, clipboard in hand, trying to look professional despite the knot in his stomach. This park was where he and Emily had their first date. He was measuring a section near the swings when he heard children laughing. Looking up, he saw a group of kids playing tag. 4 of them stood out. They looked about 4 or 5 years old and seemed to be moving as a unit. As they ran closer, Mark froze. Something about them caught his eye. The way they moved, the shape of their faces, and when the tallest one turned, looking right at Mark with curious eyes, he felt like he was looking at an old photograph of himself. Same hazel eyes. Same dimple on the right cheek when he smiled. Same cowlick in the hair that never stayed down. Mark's clipboard fell to the ground with a clatter. "Jason, Jake, Jess, Jade, stay where I can see you." A woman's voice called out. A voice Mark would know anywhere. He turned slowly, and there she was, Emily. Still beautiful, her dark hair shorter now, wearing a simple sundress and looking more confident than he remembered. She was walking toward the children, not yet noticing him. Then she looked up. Their eyes met across the grass. And in that moment, as understanding dawned on him, Mark realized why those 4 children looked so familiar. Why they were exactly the right age. Why Tom had been so cold. Why Emily had been trying so desperately to reach him 5 years ago. The ground seemed to shift under his feet as Emily's face went pale. The children, his children, continued playing, unaware that their world was about to change forever. Time seemed to freeze as Mark and Emily stared at each other across the playground. The sounds of children playing faded into the background. 5 years of silence stretched between them like a physical thing. Mark took one step forward, then stopped when Emily shook her head slightly. Her face wasn't angry, just protective, as she called the children to her side. "Who's that man?" asked the little girl with pigtails. "Jade," Mark remembered hearing. "Just someone Moni used to know," Emily said calmly, that Mark could see her hands trembling. "It's time to go home now." "But we just got here," protested one of the boys, the one with the cowlick identical to Mark's childhood photos. "We'll come back tomorrow," Emily promised, gathering their small backpacks. "Grandma's making your favorite cookies today, remember?" The mention of cookies was enough to distract the children, and they followed Emily toward the parking lot. As they passed by, Mark couldn't help but stare. 4 little versions of himself, with hints of Emily in their smiles and the shape of their eyes. "Emily," he managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. She paused, then told the kids, "Go wait by the car. I'll be right there." When they were out of earshot, she turned to him. "I need you to stay away from us." They're mine, aren't they?" His voice cracked on the last word. Emily's eyes flashed. "Biologically, yes. In every way that matters? No. They're mine. I raised them. I was there for every fever, every nightmare, every first step. Why didn't you tell me?" She laughed, a short, hurt sound. "I tried, Mark. I called you 6 times the week you left. I left messages telling you I was pregnant. You never called back. You changed your number." The weight of it hit him like a punch. The calls he'd ignored. The voicemails he'd deleted without listening to the end. "I didn't know," he said weakly. "I swear I didn't know about the babies." "Would it have mattered?" Emily asked, her voice steady now. "You ran because you were scared of commitment. Finding out I was pregnant with not 1 but 4 babies would have sent you running even faster." She was right, and they both knew it. "They're beautiful," Mark said, watching the quadruplets by the car. They were taking turns hopping over a crack in the sidewalk, laughing together. Yes, they are, Emily agreed, softening slightly. And they're happy. They have a good life. What did you tell them? About me? Emily sighed. That their daddy wasn't ready to be a father. Nothing more, nothing less. I don't speak badly of you. I would never do that. Mark felt tears burning behind his eyes. Would you let me meet them? Properly, I mean. Emily studied his face for a long moment. Why? So you can disappear again when it gets hard. Because raising kids is hard, Mark. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. I know I don't deserve it, Mark said. But I'd like a chance to at least know them. I've changed. Everyone says they've changed, Emily replied. Meet me at the coffee shop on Oak Street tomorrow at 10. Just you and me talking first, then I'll decide. She walked away before he could answer, joining the children and helping them into a minivan. Mark watched them drive away, feeling like his entire world had just been turned upside down. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. He paced his apartment, looking at the 4 faces he'd seen today in his mind. Their names echoed in his head. Jason, Jake, Jessica, Jade. His children. 4 lives he had no part in creating but had helped create. By morning, he knew whatever happened at the coffee shop would change his life forever. There was no running this time, no easy escape. Those 4 little faces had awakened something in him he didn't know was there. A fierce desire to know them, to be known by them. As he drove to meet Emily, Mark realized with perfect clarity that he was facing the moment his own father had faced years ago. The choice to stay or go, to fight through the fear or let it win. This time, he wouldn't be his father's son. The coffee shop was quieter than Mark remembered. He arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a table in the corner where they could talk privately. His hands wouldn't stop shaking as he waited, checking his watch every few minutes. Emily walked in exactly at 10, looking composed in simple jeans and a blue sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, the way she used to wear it when they first met. Something about that made Mark's chest ache. Thanks for coming, he said as she sat down across from him. I ordered for us both, she replied, nodding at the 2 coffee mugs already on the table. You still take it black. The fact that she remembered such a small detail about him made Mark pause. Yeah, thank you. They sat in awkward silence for a moment, 5 years of unspoken words hanging between them. I don't even know where to start, Mark finally said. Emily took a deep breath. Let me start then. I found out I was pregnant 3 days before you left. I was trying to find the right time to tell you. Then that night, you picked that stupid fight about dry cleaning. I'm so sorry, Mark whispered. When the doctor told me it was quadruplets, I nearly fainted. Emily continued, a small smile playing on her lips despite herself. 4 babies at once. The odds are like 1 in 700,000. Was the pregnancy okay? Emily's eyes clouded. It was rough. Bed rest for the last 3 months. They came 6 weeks early. Jason was only 3 pounds when he was born. Mark felt his throat tighten, imagining Emily going through all of that alone. Who helped you? Your parents? My mom moved in with me for the first year. My sister came on weekends. Friends took shifts. People from the hospital where I worked organized meal deliveries. She looked at him directly. We managed. We had to. I wish I had been there, Mark said, meaning it more than he'd ever meant anything. But you aren't, Emily replied simply. And now they're 4 years old, and they have a life that doesn't include you. Mark nodded, accepting the truth of her words. Tell me about them, please. For the first time, Emily's face softened with genuine warmth. Jason is the oldest by 6 minutes. He's the serious one, always making sure the others follow the rules. Jake is the daredevil. If there's trouble, he'll find it. Jessica is my little artist. And Jade? Emily's smile grew tender. Jade is pure sunshine. She never meets a stranger. Mark listened, hanging on every word, trying to build pictures of these 4 little people in his mind. Do they know they're special? Being quadruplets, I mean. They know they're what people call quads, but to them, it's just normal. They've always had each other. Mark hesitated, then asked the question he'd been dreading. Do they have a father figure in their lives? Emily gave him a level look. I've dated a couple of people, but nothing serious. The quads are my priority. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by shame. He had no right to feel relieved. "What do you want, Mark?" Emily finally asked. "Why are you back now?" "I came back for work," he admitted. "But seeing them yesterday, I can't walk away again. I know I don't deserve a place in their lives, but I want to try, if you'll let me." Emily studied him. "And when your project is done? When work takes you somewhere else?" "I'll stay," Mark said without hesitation, "or I'll commute, or I'll find a new job. Whatever it takes." "Easy to say now," Emily pointed out. "I know you have no reason to believe me, but I'm not the same person who left. Seeing them, knowing what I missed. I can't explain it, but something clicked into place. Like I finally understand what matters." Emily was quiet for a long time, turning her coffee mug in circles. Finally, she said, "We take family walks in the park on Sunday mornings, 9 o'clock. If you want to meet them, really meet them, you can join us. But I need to tell them who you are first in my own way." "Thank you," Mark breathed. "I'll be there." As they stood to leave, Emily added, "And Mark, don't make promises to them you can't keep. They're little, but they remember everything. If you're going to be in their lives, be all in, no halfway." Walking back to his car, Mark felt terrified and hopeful all at once. Sunday was only 2 days away. In 48 hours, he would meet his children, not as a stranger in a park, but as their father. The weight of that word, father, nearly brought him to his knees. Sunday morning arrived with clear skies and a cool breeze. Mark had barely slept, his mind racing with thoughts of the meeting ahead. He changed his outfit 3 times, finally settling on jeans and a simple blue button-down shirt. He'd even gotten a haircut the day before, wanting to look his best. He arrived at the park 30 minutes early, too nervous to sit still at home. Pacing near the entrance, he rehearsed what he might say, though Emily had warned him she would do most of the talking at first. At exactly 9, he spotted them walking up the path. Emily in the middle, 2 children holding each of her hands, the other 2 walking slightly ahead. They were dressed in colorful jackets, each a different color: red, blue, purple, and green. It was the only way Mark could tell them apart from a distance. His heart hammered against his ribs as they approached. Emily gave him a small nod, a signal that the children knew something about who he was. "Good morning," Mark said, his voice barely steady. The quadruplets stared at him with matching curious expressions. The tallest boy, Jason in the red jacket, Mark guessed, moved slightly in front of his siblings, protective even at 4 years old. "Kids," Emily said gently, "this is the person I told you about last night. This is Mark. He's your daddy." The word daddy hit Mark like a physical blow. He knelt down, bringing himself to their eye level. "Hi," he said simply, afraid to say more and mess everything up. Jake, in the blue jacket, was the first to speak. "Where were you?" "Mommy said you were away." The directness of the question caught Mark off guard. He looked at Emily, who gave a slight nod, encouraging him to answer honestly. "I was living in another city," Mark said carefully. "But I'm back now, and I really wanted to meet all of you." Jessica, in the purple jacket, studied him intently. "Do you have other kids?" "No," Mark answered. "Just you 4. "Then why didn't you want us?" she asked, her small face serious. Mark felt his throat tighten. "It wasn't that I didn't want you. I was scared of being a dad. But that was my mistake, not because of anything about you." Jason frowned, clearly not satisfied with this answer. "Tommy's dad lives with him. Why don't you live with us?" Before Mark could answer, Jade, the smallest in the green jacket, stepped forward and touched his cheek with her tiny hand. "You have dots like mine," she said, pointing to her own dimples. "Yes," Mark said, his voice cracking. "Those are called dimples. My mom always said they were angels kissed us before we were born." Jade smiled at that, revealing dimples identical to his. "Did angels kiss me lots of times?" "They must have," Mark replied, fighting back tears. Emily suggested they all walk together, and the tension eased slightly as they moved along the path. Jason stayed close to his mother, still wary. Jake peppered Mark with questions about where he lived and if he had a dog. Jessica watched silently, taking everything in. And little Jade slipped her hand into Mark's after about 10 minutes, a gesture so simple yet so profound it nearly undid him. They reached the playground, and the children ran ahead to the swings. Emily and Mark sat on a nearby bench watching them. They're taking it better than I expected, Emily admitted. Jason doesn't trust me, Mark observed. He's protective. He's always looked out for the others. She paused. They all handle things differently. Jade makes friends instantly. Jake is curious about everything. Jessica needs time to process. Mark nodded, watching his children play. They moved as a unit, always aware of each other's location, the way only children who've shared everything since before birth could be. What happens now? He asked quietly. That's up to you, Emily replied. They know who you are now. The question is, what kind of father do you want to be? Mark watched as Jason helped Jade onto a swing, carefully pushing her while Jake and Jessica raced each other on the monkey bars. These 4 little people carried his blood, his dimples, his cowlick, but they were strangers to him. Strangers he suddenly couldn't imagine living without. The kind who stays, he said firmly. The kind who's there for everything big and small. Even when it's hard? Emily asked. Even when they're sick or angry or disappointing? Especially then, Mark answered, watching his children play in the morning sunlight, feeling something break open inside him, something that had been closed off for far too long. The next few weeks passed in a blur for Mark. He started with short visits, stopping by after work to join the quads for dinner twice a week. Each visit was a delicate dance of getting to know these small humans who shared his DNA but had formed their personalities completely without him. He quickly learned that each child approached him differently. Jason remained guarded, watching Mark's every move with careful eyes. He would answer questions politely but rarely initiated conversation. Mark recognized himself in the boy's cautious nature, always waiting for disappointment, preparing for someone to leave. Jake was the opposite, bombarding Mark with endless questions. Do you know how to ride a skateboard? Can you fix broken toys? Have you ever seen a real shark? His curiosity was boundless, and Mark found himself researching topics at night just to be prepared for the next round of questions. Jessica kept her distance physically but observed everything. She would sit across the room, drawing in her sketchbook, but Mark noticed her eyes constantly flicking up to study him. Once he caught a glimpse of her drawing. It was him, surprisingly detailed for a 4-year-old, sitting at the kitchen table laughing at something Jake said. And then there was Jade, sweet Jade who had accepted him instantly. She would climb into his lap during story time, her small hand patting his cheek when she wanted his attention. You smell nice, she told him once, leaning against his chest, like cinnamon gum. The first real test came when Jason caught a bad cold that spread quickly to the other 3. Mark arrived for his usual Tuesday visit to find Emily exhausted, hair unwashed, dark circles under her eyes. Maybe tonight's not good, she said, her voice raspy from lack of sleep. They're all sick. Jake and Jessica have fevers, and Jade can't stop coughing. Mark hesitated only a moment. Let me help. You look like you haven't slept in days. Emily started to refuse, then simply nodded, too tired to argue. That night, Mark learned what parenting really meant. He helped Emily give medicine to cranky, feverish children. He held cool washcloths to small foreheads. He read the same story 6 times to Jade, who couldn't sleep for coughing. When Jake threw up all over his new shoes at midnight, Mark cleaned it up without complaint. Around 2 in the morning, with all 4 children finally asleep, Mark found Emily in the kitchen, crying silently at the table. Henny, he said softly, sitting beside her. They're all asleep now. She wiped her eyes quickly. It's not usually this bad. They don't usually all get sick at once. How have you done this alone for 4 years? He asked, truly wondering. Emily gave a tired smile, not always gracefully, but they're worth every hard night. Mark nodded, understanding for the first time what he'd walked away from, not just the joy and the cute moments, but the hard, messy reality of raising children. And somehow, cleaning up vomit and wiping runny noses had felt more meaningful than any project he'd ever completed at work. Thank you for staying, Emily said, surprising him. You could have left when things got gross. I'm done leaving, Mark replied simply. Over the next few months, Mark became a fixture in the quads' lives. He learned their routines, their favorite foods, their fears. He discovered that Jason loved dinosaurs but was afraid of thunderstorms. Jake could build incredible structures with blocks but struggled to sit still during reading time. Jessica rarely spoke in groups but would chatter endlessly one-on-one about the stories she made up. Jade sang constantly, making up songs about everything from breakfast cereal to the family cat. The biggest breakthrough came during a trip to the zoo. Mark had gotten permission from Emily to take all 4 children by himself for the first time. He planned everything carefully: snacks, extra clothes, the stroller for when little legs got tired. Everything was going smoothly until they reached the reptile house. Jake ran ahead excitedly, while Jade decided she was afraid and refused to enter. Jessica wanted to see the poison dart frogs, and Jason needed a bathroom break. For a moment, Mark felt overwhelmed, uncertain which child needed him most. Then Jason tugged his sleeve. "Dad," he said, using the word for the first time ever, "I can take Jake if you want to stay with Jade." That simple word, "Dad," spoken in Jason's serious little voice, changed everything. Mark knelt down, meeting his oldest son's eyes. "That's really helpful, buddy. Thank you." Jason nodded solemnly, taking his role seriously as he went to supervise his brother. And in that small moment of cooperation, Mark felt something shift. He wasn't just a visitor in their lives anymore. He was their father. And somehow, imperfectly but genuinely, they were becoming a family. 6 months after the park encounter that changed everything, Mark sat in the back row of the community center, watching his 4 children on stage for their preschool graduation. Each wore a tiny cap and gown, looking both adorable and impossibly grown up. Jason stood tall and serious, carefully following all the teacher's instructions. Jake fidgeted constantly, his cap slipping sideways until a teacher straightened it. Jessica clutched her certificate with both hands, eyes wide at the crowd watching them. And Jade beamed at everyone, waving enthusiastically when she spotted Mark. Emily sat beside him, close but not touching. Their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had expected, not romance, but a partnership built on the foundation of 4 small lives they both cherished. "I got the offer yesterday," Mark said quietly as the children sang a goodbye song. "Regional director. They want me to oversee projects in 3 states. Emily tensed beside him. "When do you leave?" I turned it down. She turned to look at him, surprise evident on her face. "But that's the promotion you've been working toward for years." Mark nodded, his eyes never leaving the stage where his children were singing. "I found something better to work toward." After the ceremony, the children ran to them in the crowded reception area, excited about cake and the small gifts Emily had brought. Dad, did you see me?" Jake called, jumping up and down. "I didn't even fall off the stage this time." "I saw you, buddy. You were awesome," Mark replied, lifting him up for a hug. Jason approached more calmly, but his eyes showed pride when he said, "I remembered all my lines in the poem." "You were the clearest speaker up there," Mark told him, squeezing his shoulder. Jessica silently handed him a drawing she'd made, stick figures of 5 people holding hands. "That's our family," she explained softly. Mark swallowed hard, folding the paper carefully and putting it in his wallet. "I'll keep it forever." Jade, nigger one for patience, tugged at his pants leg. "Daddy, pick me up too. It's my turn." As he lifted her, breathing in the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo, Mark marveled at how natural it felt now. 6 months ago, these children had been strangers. Now he couldn't imagine life without their morning kagos, bedtime stories, endless questions, and sticky hugs. Later that evening, after the children were in bed, Mark and Emily sat on her front porch swing, the summer air warm around them. "I signed the lease today," Mark said. "The house on Maple Street. It's only 3 blocks from here." Emily nodded. "The blue one with the big backyard?" "That's the one. Close enough for the kids to go back and forth easily, but," he hesitated, "far enough to give you a space." They had discussed this arrangement carefully. Mark would have his own home nearby, where the children could stay some nights. They would co-parent but live separately, an unusual arrangement, but one that seemed right for them. "My mom thinks we're crazy," Emily admitted with a small laugh. "She says we should either get back together or keep things more separate." "What do you think?" Mark asked, watching her profile in the porch light. Emily was quiet for a moment. "I think we're finding our own way. The kids are happy, that's what matters." Mark nodded, understanding the gift she'd given him. A second chance he didn't deserve, but was determined to honor. "I missed so much," he said quietly. Their first words, first steps. "You're here now," Emily replied. and they have so many firsts ahead. First day of kindergarten, first lost tooth, first bike ride without training wheels. Mark thought about the road that had brought him here, the fear that had driven him away, the twist of fate that had brought him back, the 4 beautiful children who had changed everything. "I almost became my father," he said, voicing the thought that had haunted him for months. Emily shook her head. "But you didn't. That's the difference. You came back. You stayed when it got hard. You chose them." As the porch swing rocked gently in the summer evening, Mark felt a peace he'd never known before. He wasn't perfect. He still had so much to learn about being a father. But every day he was proving to himself, to Emily, and most importantly to Jason, Jake, Jessica, and Jade, that love was stronger than fear. He had left once, running from responsibility and connection, but life had given him a second chance in the form of 4 small faces that looked just like his own. And this time he was staying, for every skinned knee, every school play, every nightmare, every triumph. For all the ordinary moments that strung together made a life worth living.